Hey all, it is Natasha with Enlightenment Garden. We made it to October, very beginning of October here, 2024. I garden out in the Phoenix, Arizona area. Typically the end of September and beginning of October, we see cooler temperatures come in. Not only are the nights supposed to be lower, but our highs also, typically in the mid to high 90s. But we're not experiencing that this year. We have heat advisories that have been in effect for weeks now. I believe last week my yard got all the way up to 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and we are consistently around that 110 range. So we are still experiencing very extreme temperatures, and I think the plants are really getting tired of it. In fact, we had a false start, which almost made it worse because the temperatures came down to the 90s. The plants started pushing growth, and then they got zapped by that extreme dry high heat, which set them back. So the one thing I can say that's positive is our low temperatures are coming down. So very early in the morning, 6 a.m., it's pleasant to be outside. Basically around 80 degrees, which is definitely a lot nicer than 90 degrees. So the plants are seeing that relief. But I'd like to take you around, show you what the plants look like after our record-setting summer here, and then just give you an overall update, things that I changed, did differently this year, projects that I've completed, and some failures as well. So hopefully you can learn from that. So we saw that drone footage. Things look pretty good despite the high heat this year. And really, I think that's a testament to the shade. When I started my garden 8 years ago, I just had a lawn and really no shade canopy from other trees. When you have such exposure like that, you definitely want to stand up some kind of a shade structure because your trees are going to be young when you first plant them. And it takes a good number of years for them to really put their roots into the ground and establish. Now, even though I've been at this for 8 years, every year I'm putting in new plants. And I tend to start the plants young. 1 gallon, 3 gallons at most. And that's because, number one, it's cheaper. It's easier to protect if I need to, the first winter. And also, I find that they establish in our soil easier and faster if they're a younger plant. The longer that a plant is in ideal soil in a container, the more chance it's going to be root bound, and the harder it is to adjust to a completely different pH and soil structure. So I do want to address some of the failures as well as some successes that I had this year, or surprises. Let's start out with the positive. So I installed a honeyquat loquat, 1 gallon size, last October, so about a year ago. It's quite small, was definitely not root bound, but fully rooted. Got that plant from Laura Farms, and this is it here. So it's about doubled in size, and the big thing is that it is not damaged by any kind of sun scorch. You can see the leaves are perfect. Now, I do have a very dense microclimate in here, but I will say this is not the first loquat that I put in the spot. I had another variety, a Premier, that was a larger size, and it definitely got damage. So I don't know if it's just the fact that this was a healthier plant, or the fact that I started it smaller as this was just a 1 gallon, or, you know, the fact that it was grown in perfect media when I bought the plant from the nursery. I suspect all those are reasons why this one is doing so well. Another thing that I did is I noticed that loquats do not like radiant heat off walls. They don't do well with that. So I did plant vetiver grass last year. It's really grown out pretty well, and that's right in front of this plant. So that may have also helped it out. There is a dense canopy of guava trees overhead, so it does get dappled light throughout the day. And if you have followed me for some time, you know that I practice multiple waterings or irrigation per day. I do 4 sessions a day, 4 minutes apiece. Each session drops about 1 gallon, so each tree is getting around 4 gallons a day. And that is not the popular thing. Everyone will preach deep and infrequent. I do that because I find that the plants do better in that condition than if I'm doing deep and infrequent, especially those plants that are fruiting like figs. So I've had people ask me, you know, how do you get your figs to look so good in summer? Mine are all drying out and aborting. Well, they need that moisture. You know, fruit, it has a good portion of water in it. So if you're not giving the plants frequent water, then that fruit's going to dry out. Just common sense. So let's look at a failure. So I don't have the plants to show you, but I did try 2 low chill cherry varieties, Dave Wilson varieties, in this little section here, planted actually where that mango is right there. I had a mini royal and a royal crimson. And those are notoriously hard to get to grow here, just to even survive our summer, let alone fruit. I haven't really heard of many people in our area getting any fruit. Now, you have a much better shot if you live in Tucson, because they need that colder temperature. So what happened to those cherries? Well, they were doing great. They were planted bare root in spring. They put on about 5 feet of growth. And then towards the end of July, they croaked. They lost all their leaves. Even though I was putting down water, it just wasn't drinking it. So the roots just didn't make it in our soil on this rootstock that was supposed to do well in clay soils. So I did get rid of those. They also were developing some gummosis, which I find really to be common with plums. And apparently this cherry had the same problem. So those kinds of rootstocks don't do well when the soil is moist. However, they also need the hydration or they desiccate because of our extreme temperatures. So I just couldn't find the right balance with that. Got rid of those, and I'm not going to be attempting to grow those again. I admit failure with that, and I'm just going to go with what works, which is going to be tropical cherries. So here we can see the cherry of the Rio Grande doing well. The Grumi Chama, this is the first time I've gotten one through the summer, but I really think it's the shade cloth overhead that's supporting it. Here we can see the Pitanga Jumbo is doing well. Got the privet stopper over there that looks fine, and the red Suriname. What's nice about all these tropical cherries is they do fine in winter. They don't require any protection. It's just in summer that you need to provide shade for them. And because my shade canopy is not grown in yet, this Inga, as you can see, is almost reaching 6 feet. I think it's going to need another year of growth before it can take the place of the shade cloth. You know, something that really helped these plants out and allowed them to not completely fry in summer. Now you can see even now with the shade cloth there are some burnt leaves, and that's because I don't have all of the side panels completely covered in shade cloth, And so the sun does travel across the sky, you know, and can get these leaves. But for the most part, it looks pretty good. And it's going to put on a lot of growth come winter. I find Cherry de Rio Grande really likes it in our winters. That's its growing season. Okay, my apricot tree here looks great, looks fine. No problems with it. Put on a lot of fruit this year. I have another one over by the loquat, right there. That looks fine. What I'll say about those two trees is they're in a microclimate, right? They have a lot of trees nearby that are providing some shade relief. The Royal Poinciana that's in the middle of my yard does block the western sun from hitting them. So they have that advantage. But I'll show you another stone fruit that needed some supplemental help. So this Laocotte apium is situated just probably about 20 feet away from my east wall that gets westward sun. This one didn't fare so well. It doesn't really have any shade canopy protecting it, and it had premature leaf drop. About mid-August, this tree just dropped all of its leaves. It just had enough. It said, I'm done with summer. I can't do it anymore. Dropped all of its leaves. Still alive, but because it has no leaves, I just stood up an umbrella just to get it through. Since we're still getting triple-digit temperatures, it's definitely not the dormant season for it yet. End of October, beginning of November is when this typically drops all of its leaves. Now, we did have a cooling spell where we had 90s for our high for a few days, and this tree responded by pushing out new leaves. Unfortunately, that was followed up by triple-digit temperatures, so those leaves got fried and dropped. Here you can see they're all fried. So I don't want to lose this tree, so I am, shading it. Do what you can to support your trees. Now for more of a permanent thing, I am growing a moringa here. And I also have an ice cream bean. It just depends which one works. So I plant really dense with the idea that not all of these trees are going to make it. And there are going to be some that are front runners. I don't know which one. So I plant dense. I can always remove a tree. If it's too crowded out. But if one doesn't make it, and I plant really far on spacing, then now I've got a void in my yard. And I don't want that, because if you have a void in your yard in this climate, your microclimate's gone. It's going to make things hotter, and it's going to put more stress on nearby trees. So that's kind of my philosophy. Planting dense also increases humidity. It just allows the plants to do better in extreme lows and highs. If I were gardening in a tropical zone, I would not be planting so dense, because that's going to invite disease. There's going to be too much humidity from that. But here it's really essential to do that. The past few months, I have just been going at all sorts of different landscape projects. And the biggest one is right here on the right. And that was I actually pulled out, disassembled, deconstructed a 12-year-old raised garden bed that was made out of retaining wall block. I've been battling fruit tree roots forever on that, including this 12-year-old pomegranate bush that was right nearby it, as well as the fig tree. The fig tree was probably the biggest problem child with the roots. Fig trees have pretty aggressive root systems, and they kept going into the garden bed. I tried all sorts of stuff, layers and layers of heavy landscape fabric, but I was just not a fan of having to dig out roots every year to grow my vegetables. So I deconstructed that bed. So with that raised bed gone, I gained all of this growing space. So I did two things. I put in pomegranates, a row of 4 new pomegranate trees, and then some just ground cover and flowering shrubs back there. You can see now the mature pomegranate has space to grow out. And then I've got my 3 mulberry containers, 20-gallon, holding the Thai dwarf variety just on blocks there. So as far as what I added on pomegranates, I really like the soft-seeded varieties. Here's a Sirnevi, pink ice, Eve, and a Parafianca. And I picked pomegranate mainly because of the location. It's a very harsh location off the wall. This is my east wall, so it gets western exposure, so a lot of afternoon sun hits this area. You need something tough like a pomegranate that can take those temperatures. And I didn't lose my garden space, so what I ended up doing was installing my metal beds that I had pre-existing right here on this flagstone patio. So while these beds have the positive aspect of this guava tree nearby, because they are on flagstone patio, the tree roots aren't going to invade these beds. So I do have weed fabric lining the bed on the bottom so that the soil doesn't fall out. I've got my irrigation lines running to it, so it's all automated. So the nice thing is these vegetables will actually be able to thrive because they'll get all the nutrition and water that I'm providing them. They won't be stolen by tree roots. You do see that I've got conduit up here and a shade structure, and that's going to be essential because this is a hot spot. But I can definitely grow more heat tolerant vegetables in a spot, and then in wintertime this is going to be a more warm location for the plants, and this will also allow me to put up frost cloth if need be. Another thing that I changed out was the arbor. So I had a black metal arbor that I was planning on training a climbing rose bush, the Don Juan variety, over, but that rose just never wanted to climb it. So I just recently installed this final arbor. Looks a lot nicer than the metal, and it's going to be cooler for that rose bush. I also added another Don Juan on this side because I did learn later on that Don Juan doesn't grow that long, so typically you do need 2 plants to cover a large arbor like this. This arbor is like 8 feet tall, so it's a pretty large structure there. You can also see I've completely changed out the walkway yet again because I had all this retaining wall block from the garden bed. I went ahead and repurposed it as the wall here, retaining wall. Then I put some lights in, some downspout lights. I took all the brick that was here and moved it to this side just for some consistency and a better look. I found I really didn't care for that metal edging, so I went back to brick. Kept tripping on it and it bends and the hose was sagging on it. And since I had all this material, I put it to use. So continued it all the way around. So this was a pretty big project. And then I also moved some pavers as well. So the other recent project that I did is this shade house. I shared last year that I put this up, I believe around August. So my subtropicals did not have the benefit of growing under this shade last year, but they did this year. And I think the results are pretty phenomenal. The amount of growth that I saw this year with these plants under 80% shade cloth blew my mind. They doubled, tripled in size during just a few months this year. And we're hitting the top of the shade, so I had to extend it. So I've now made this 20 by 10 structure 10 feet high. So I added another 4 feet, 3.5 feet, 4 feet. It's pretty top heavy now, so I do need to add some bracing just to make it more sturdy. And just to keep the shade cloth from sagging, I do have some straps there to help that out. But this will provide all these plants, the mangoes, star fruit, dragon fruit, jaboticaba, and others, a lot more room to grow for next year. And my plan is actually, I'm going to just leave this cloth up. So I did upgrade to an Illuminate shade cloth I got at Greenhouse Megastore. It's a custom piece, 12 feet by 20 feet. And I went with this because I want something that lasts. The stuff that they sell on Amazon tends to fall apart. It's not the best material. This came from an actual agricultural place. So this is going to last a really long time. And it will actually double as my frost protection. I'm going to just use this overhead, keep it on all year round, and let that catch the frost. So that was a big project, but definitely something you can do as a DIY. I try to do as much as I can DIY. It's an investment initially to get the parts, but like I've mentioned many times, EMT conduit, you can easily break it down and repurpose it for another project when it's no longer needed. So really nice. The other thing that I've done a lot of this year was taking my container plants and putting them in the ground. So you'll see that my plumeria area has grown. I've actually got these planted all the way around the pond now because I found that this is the perfect microclimate for plumeria. They seem to do well in both summer and winter. Don't have to do any kind of supplemental heat. I do have 30% shade over the pond, and that seems to be enough for them. So we'll be doing a full fall tour, probably at the beginning of November, as I usually do, where I'll go through all the plants, but just want to give you an update. Yes, it was a hellish summer, and we're not even out of summer. It still feels like it. Hopefully we will be in the 90s soon here. I think both the plants and we need that to start cooling down and enter the different season. But I wanted to give you an update. Everything seems to be doing really well. All I would suggest is if you don't have that canopy grown in on your trees, stand up some structures.